Incredibly excited for today's event, as I am for all of our events, and an opportunity to interact with such a esteemed group of speakers, and also people who are interested in the future, or like myself, like we are at the point. So today, we are going to talk about how to get started with the first generation VMS, avoiding the pitfalls, avoiding the keys to success, with Wayne Burgess and John Clark. Hopefully, you've seen some of the promotional videos and you've read some of the instructions, but just a tremendous amount of information, perspective, and data. So, and then, like we do with all the fine events, I'm going to get this housekeeping. And without further ado, let's get this party started. To discussion with the insight with Wayne and John. If you want to do a brief intro, guys, go right ahead, but let's get started.
All right, great. Thanks, Brian. Thanks everybody for attending today. I'm Wayne Burgess, co-founder of Connexus, and my business partner, John.
Yep, John Clark, co-founder Connexus, like Wayne said.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into it. So what we thought we'd do today for individuals that have never implemented a VMS before is just try to give everybody 15 hacks that we've learned over our careers that we found are critical. It's going to be very foundational based. It's not going to be focused on functional or technical requirements. But we will address, how you get to those in those 15 hacks. So yeah, so really excited to present to you guys today. So what we thought we'd start with is a quick poll just to get you guys thinking about what percentage of typical HR tech implementations fail. So maybe think about a number in your head, and once you've got it, maybe we'll switch over to the next slide and take a look and see what the reality is.
I think since one of the things since we didn't put together poll because 1 to 100 is quite significant. Put it up in the chat. What do you think percentage of tech implementations fail? Oops, there you go.
Well done, Harvey. 40%.
Nice.
Well done. Yeah. So 42%, according to a survey by Josh Person Company in 2022 of HR leaders, 42% of their HR tech implementations fail. Now, that's not just VMSs, that's everything under the sun. But it's similar in the VMS space. And it's not just didn't go live, but the majority of them just never lived up to the promise in that original business case. So, what we're going to try and do today is try to help you lay that foundational framework to prevent that failure in your business. All right, we'll start off with kind of that hope scenario that I think a lot of us fall into when we do any type of implementation, whether it's tech or whether it's a outsourcing deal, whatever that is we're trying to implement in our company is, you build it and then you pray that it's not going to go off the rails. And so again, let's hope we give you some information to help you, move beyond that hope scenario in your project. All right. So hack number one in my book, it's the most important thing. It's something you should keep with you through your entire project right from day one is understanding why you would implement a VMS or why you would ever do that project that you're trying to do. So it goes beyond just a VMS. It goes basically anything that you're trying to implement or trying to do is what is that why? And it's not just one thing. It could be two, three, four things like Brian said it right off the bat, right? Is it visibility? Is it control? Is it compliance? Did you have an internal audit done? Are you trying to drive efficiencies and cost savings in your organization? You need to write that why down. You need to keep it front and center as you go through your process. And you need to allow it to live. It needs to live and adapt and change as the business environment changes, as your organizational goals change, as your business changes, it might need to adapt. But the most important thing is once you have that why and you think that's the why, you need to socialize it in your organization. So a lot of the theme of these 15 hacks will be related to you involving as many people in your organization as you can with this, this VMS, or if you're looking to do a full VMS MSP project, it really is about socializing it with the entire organization that touches contingent workforce.
Can I bring something up? And one of the things I think is also important when you start with the why is making sure that the why isn't living only in your own head. Would you guys agree? I think a great number of program managers go with the goal that is limited to their own perspective,
Yeah.
as opposed to really considering the benefits for stakeholders. Do you guys see that as a similar challenge with a lot of these Gen 1 programs?
Yeah, it's amazing. A lot of these things we're going to talk about today are very common sense, and you think individually, you look at it and say, "Well, that why would you not do that?" But it's the sum of all the parts, right? So as you go through the 15 of them, when you get one wrong, and maybe you get number 5 wrong and number 7 wrong, they compound on each other. So I think you're right, Brian. I think it's really important that you involve as many people in your organization as possible and you don't, we've got one of our hacks, which you've touched on already, right? Is don't do this in a vacuum. Never works. It fails 100% of the time. So yeah, I agree 100%. I don't know, John, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's a microcosm of like the broader industry. Like every company, every industry has a different trigger point as to why you would do this. It could be cost, it could be quality, risk, process, it could be, an ethos of digital transformation. And then that's all broken down by each department, division within a company as well. So yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. And then, so moving on to number 2. So I think when I look back at, when I did my first implementation, I was very lucky. This was in the late 90s. And I had some great mentors. I had people that knew the industry. They got me introduced to some of the top people in the industry then, even though it was in its infancy. And I really understood the contingent workforce category. I learned a lot. And so I would encourage you, if you're just getting into this category or you're doing something for the first time in this category, network, meet as many people as you can, attend all the events, get engaged with this industry. The contingent workforce industry and the professionals in it are all fantastic people. It's a very transparent, open group of people. So learn as much as you can. I'm still learning. I'm sure Brian, you're still learning. And so it's really, really critical that you learn as much as you can. And this isn't just about external, this is about internal too. So focusing inwardly on how your organization uses contingent labor, where they use it, understand the organization and the leaders and the people that use it day to day, meet those people, understand what their challenges are. And ultimately, out of all of that, you get in your head and then finally on paper what I would call an opportunity assessment. So you can start to see where your organization maybe lacks and maybe has some gaps compared to other organizations you've networked with and talked with, and some of the experts that'll tell you, here's what best in class is. And then you can compare it to your own organization, and very quickly you can come up with some opportunities and you start to formulate that initial part of that business case that you can say, yeah, okay, maybe I should build this and take this forward to my leadership. And this one is a classic for me. I think in every large scale project I've ever been involved with, someone invariably in the organization comes up with the idea that we don't need a technology provider, we can go build this ourselves. So whether it's a SharePoint site, whether it's the IT department doing it, and I would caution any organization to stay away from building some sort of technology solution that's not core to your business. And I like almost 100% of the time, it's not. And so I'll use the analogy of, a manufacturer is going to retain the procurement of all their raw materials or all their input goods. They're not going to go out and buy and build an ERP system like SAP or Oracle. They're going to go buy that. And so I would strongly urge anyone considering to building it themselves, unless you resell contingent labor or are involved in the business of contingent labor, do not go build it yourself. And there's a lot of reasons why. Sure, you might build something that fits for your organization today, but who's going to train the people? Who's going to provide the customer care to the users? Who's going to keep it up to date with as your business changes as well? So I find it's really critical that if you're going to do that, it needs to be core to your business. And I've just never seen that actual case. So that's my experience anyway.
I didn't even know that this was even a thing. I'm surprised. When we say build it ourselves, is it limited to what FileMaker Pro, or they just build like a Zapier instance? How do you can build
Yeah,
technology?
SharePoint, email routing. There's a lot of things organizations can do, right? Databases that they try to do it themselves internally, thinking they're going to, and a lot of times it's people just thinking they're going to be the hero internally, right? And they want that flag to plant on their planet, and that just never goes well. I've never seen it go well.
Or when they try to adapt an existing tool that they use, like an ATS or a Salesforce or something,
Yeah.
and then it's brick by brick by brick towards failure.
Yeah, and it's a shame because a lot of providers will say, yes, 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 we can do it, but that's not core to their business either, right? So you've got to make sure when you're choosing a partner that whatever they're telling you they do is core to their business and it's not something new that they have to build. So yeah, no, that's a good point, John.
We just posted a poll, so just take a moment to comply with the poll or not comply, respond to the poll if you get a chance. Let's carry on, guys.
And number four, once you've done all your background work, you've got an opportunity assessment, you understand the category, then it's time to really dig in. And, if you get typically what I would do is I'd go to my boss if I'm in procurement or talent acquisition, and I would say, hey, I think we have an opportunity here. Get some approval to go investigate it and go dig deeper. And then once you've got that approval, then I would start doing a little deeper dive. Reach out to the heavy users in the organization, reach out to finance, try to baseline everything it is that your current company does as it relates to contingent workforce. So define your current cost baseline. What do your process flows look like? Who's wasting their time on this? What are there a lot of invoice errors coming in from your staffing agencies? What's your time to fill like? Like start baselining some of those metrics and some of those things that those experts have told you are really, really important to understand in your business. And then once you've got that cost baseline down, you need to start developing, okay, based on best in class, what I've been told is best in class, what are those future state costs? If I was able to implement, kind of the utopian program, what does that future state look like? And then ultimately out of that, A minus B equals C, which is the benefits you're going to get. So not just hard dollar savings, margin, supplier markup reductions or rate reductions or visibility to be able to consolidate spend with suppliers. That's kind of the 101 stuff, but what are the soft benefits you're going to get? So, I mean, it could be competitive advantage in your organization as well, right? Being able to get resources on the ground quicker. If you rebuild those resources, you're able to fill seats and you're able to actually drive revenue enhancement to your organization. So there's a lot of benefits that come from a VMS and an overall contingent workforce program. So all of these can be built in an overall view for your organization. And one of the things I also learned to do very early on was go to my finance team and understand what their internal rate of return target was. And my goal was to beat that in my business case. And if I couldn't, then I needed to come up with some value that was beyond that from a financial perspective that made it so compelling that the organization had to say yes. If I couldn't meet it and I couldn't get a value statement that made it that convincing, then the answer was maybe we should be investing our resources in other things rather than this. But I'll be honest with you, I've never run into an organization that has first generation that we weren't able to build a very strong net benefit statement. And then once you've got that, don't lose it. One thing that drives me crazy is you build this great business case, you get it approved, you get it all green lit, and then you forget it. It gets shelved and no one goes back and compares what you promised to what you delivered. And I think that is critical. And it also puts pressure on yourself to make sure you're focused on delivering the value that you promised your organization would be delivered. And you pressure your suppliers and your partners as well to help you deliver that. So don't lose sight of that ultimate business case you built.
I think that is such a fantastic little bit of wisdom there, Wayne. I want to reinforce it. At a minimum, you should be making sure that any project at least exceeds your cost of capital internally and the expected rate of return. That should be the governing principle. Reach out and stick around afterwards if you really don't know how to do that or what that is. But without a doubt, I think if you could learn nothing else, understand that particular element, and that will make all the difference. They're both in terms of the ability to deliver, having a deep understanding of the metrics that you're going to have to make happen within your program, but also, and more importantly, the type of impression it's going to make on your C-level executives, that you understand that's the way that they think. That's the way that they think. If you have a program or a solution that delivers $1 million, but $1 million is 0.3 when your cost of capital is 0.7, you're not going to get that project greenlit. So being able to speak that financial shorthand is such a great insight, Wayne. I really wanted to make sure that we reinforce.
Yeah.
If you guys in the speak on the phone use or consider, please make a moment to put that in the chat. Sorry, Wayne, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, and make sure your numbers are realistic, right? Because smart people will rip you apart in a second. So you have to be able to defend those numbers. And I've been in rooms before, and we all know we make these projections, and there's never been a forecast I haven't liked. So we need to make sure that your assumptions and everything that goes into it are realistic, so that you can defend it and you don't get shot down. And then at the end of the business case, when you do finally get in front of the executive sponsors or your internal executive leadership, and you do get that green light, make sure you've got it. Don't go and start doing work and engaging your potential suppliers and your other employees and colleagues in something that hasn't actually been greenlit and might get shelved. So make sure you've got it before you start really engaging people in work. And if someone comes to you and asks you for help, make sure they have it as well. So it's really, really important that you've got budget greenlit and you've got executive sponsorship. Otherwise, you're just going to waste your time and you're going to waste everyone else's. Nothing wrong with doing preliminary work. That's part of our jobs. Identify opportunities, present them. But to go actually realize it, you need to get that budget and that sign off.
All right, over to me.
Yep, see you.
Time to switch accents. Yeah, one of the key components for us, obviously, is the whole dynamic of what's in it for me. And Brian touched on that earlier with, different areas of a business and they have different priorities. For us, it's about understanding what the why is for each individual department or user and making sure that they understand that so they really understand that the new platform will benefit them. It has to be tied to some type of goal and not just a corporate initiative.
This is really something that I think is so critical. I'm sorry to hit upon it earlier, but this is something that is so often lost in many general programs. The purpose of the program is to deliver a business solution that helps products get out the door better, faster, cheaper, or increases the overall ability of stakeholders to multiply their ability to deliver their own individual perspectives. So often, and I've been working as a practitioner and advising thousands of program managers over the last 25 years, and they often lose sight of why they're there in the first place, thinking that instead the program exists primarily to deliver savings against their own personal goals, as opposed to understanding the consequences, the features, benefits, both positive and negative outcomes of any program. It's not about you. It's about your clients, and your stakeholders are not just internally everyone who is affected by the program. So suppliers, candidates, finance, accounting, hiring managers, or engagement managers. How is this going to improve their daily lives, and focus on that initially, and the other benefits come as a consequence of the objective. So I'm sorry to kind of get on my soapbox on there, but it's something I think is really important.
Well said. Yeah. So one of the pitfalls that we often see, and I've seen this very recently, one of the next point is do not do this in a vacuum. Wayne touched on this earlier, but people tend to get very emotionally attached. I've seen program leads spend 2 years, building the business case, doing the research, and are very emotionally attached to it, but really don't take the time to engage the right group of resources within their organization. So that's top down. You need executive sponsorship. You need someone that can put their hand up at a senior level and sponsor this thing, but also engage the users. The people are actually going to engage with the tool. Like I see many examples of people talking about VMS at the program level, and the program team rarely use the tool. It's the managers who are actually in the system using that. So engaging those real users who are going to be affected and the most, engage them in the solution is the best case scenario, but keep them in the loop through the entire process. So across the organization, it is that socializing, gaining consensus, engaging, making people feel like they are part of the solution. And then once you get going on the actual project or the program, making sure you have really solid cross-departmental representation from a steering committee perspective, those executive sponsors, resources from procurement, HR, talent acquisition, business, finance, whatever that may be, however the culture works with your organization, and have a real steady cadence of what the project looks like and how the program is running. So making sure you have weekly status meetings, and even for us from an implementation perspective, there are periods where you go into a bit of a lull, but keeping that cadence going, keeping that visibility high, and having someone that is dedicated to the project, and where possible, not doing it off the side of their desk. And I've seen recent examples of that as well, where procurement people, for example, they're super busy working on multiple categories and they're trying to get this thing going on the side. I think it's really important to have one centralized project person that you can turn to for the project.
And I remember it was years ago, John, we did a consulting project and we went in and were helping them get that foundational base ready. And one of the call outs we had was they had not engaged their leadership. They had not engaged the business users who had already said things were working fine. We don't need anything. And we checked in a year after we'd stopped working with them. It was a $30 million program and they had less than $1 million in spend a year after going live. So, and that's just a classic example.
Yeah, it showed up in the manager's inbox. This is what we're doing. And they have relationships with their vendors and they're very sensitive towards that. So yeah, absolutely right, Wayne.
This is one of my favorite ones, and one that John referenced during his video.
Yeah. Yeah, like this is one of the main things that we see. So the next hack in terms of don't is do not get distracted by the shiny object. So very often, and this even happens at a resource perspective, right? You get a really slick sales team fly in and show you this like really high end product, and they talk about machine learning and AI, and everyone's like, yeah, super excited. That sounds awesome. But really it distracts you from what it is you're trying to achieve. You're trying to address the problems within your own business. What problem are we trying to solve? So if you've done the right homework at the start, if you've created that right business case, those ROI calculators that Wayne mentioned, then you know exactly what your requirements will be. And that is what you should focus on. So that sort of outcome, what is it? What is the problem we're trying to solve? Where do we want to get to? That's what you want to really focus on, and not really get sucked into like what we would call phase 10 syndrome, right? Like people are like, well, it'll be great that the tool can convert to Mandarin because we have $1 million to spend in China. If you have 100 million in the US, like you're really getting down a path that's not relevant to the program and it's distracting you from hitting the high value, low hanging fruit, particularly that you can get from the start. Things like user experience, I see some large, very long-standing tools that can be over-manufactured and complicated. And, we all have apps in our phone that we deal with every day that are very, very slick for very basic activities. So focusing on how the users will use it and not the back-end algorithms and reporting and analytics and crazy machine learning functionality, making sure that the people who use it for the most basic activities will be engaged in. Our marketing team tells us that we're looking to build a tool that the users love to use. I think a more realistic term is that they don't hate. So that user experience is really important from my perspective.
It's such a fantastic bar. I think the one thing to remember is actually two things. One, people are trained how to use technology by Amazon and their bank and however they choose to interact with the internet. And that is the benchmark by which you need to establish. How do people use and interact with these technologies? one that, so really the UX and user experience is critical because people, unlike when we all started our careers many years ago, the experience with the internet was next to nothing. So the expectations were next to nothing. Now, between social media and Amazon and what have you, people really have high expectations about that UI or an activity and how simple it is to use. And also, John mentioned to make decisions based on theoreticals. I can tell you hundreds of clients who have said, hey, we chose this system X over system Y because we may choose to, for example, deploy in China. Then that 5 years later, that never happens, and the implementation may have been much more successful and for a lower cost option with others. So this is one of my favorite elements to remember, is focus on what's important as opposed to theoreticals or abstracts.
Yeah. And I think honestly, Brian, from my perspective, as technologies go, a BMS is relatively simple, right? This is not some crazy ERP system that has manufacturing and depreciating assets. It's relatively simple. And I think our industry can be guilty of overcomplicating it because they want it to sound more sophisticated than it is. And they do that. And the cost is the basic fundamentals, right? The user experience, the simplicity. I think that can be abandoned because organizations are trying to sound smarter than they probably are.
Yeah. Or the statistics are that people use only 10% of Excel, right?
Yeah.
The technical term for that is called the consumption gap. And
Right.
the consumption gap in our business is incredibly high. And on average for VMS, it's running around 30%. So people only use 30% of the functionality within the most VMS system ever. They make decisions based on 100% because it's often really challenging to differentiate between solutions, and making decisions to buyer, as you both know, is incredibly hard.
And users are really smart too. Even in our business, when we're, working with customers and understanding what their requirements are, and we're looking at maybe making an enhancement, and then we find a user that's actually figured out how to use the system to meet that requirement without spending any money on enhancement. And you go, wow, I never even thought of using the tool that way and didn't realize it could do that. Yeah, there's a lot of ways you can get to the answer you need without over engineering and building something new.
There you go. You just got us to the next slide. Well done.
What a segue, Wayne. Well done. So yeah, look, there's a lot of powerful functionality within the tool. Like I think that the 30% is a really good example, Brian. But there are examples where, and many examples, I would say it's more common than not for people to over engineer the process. A lot of what I see is you get into a business requirements meeting and the different divisions will say, well, it'd be really nice if we had this, and it'll be really nice if we had that. And then that multiplies across all your different categories of talent acquisition and reporting and finance. And before you know it, you have this super complicated setup with tons of customization. So not every single piece of activity in the system needs to be automated. And I think that also applies for the types of VMS that you may choose, right? You don't have to pick something just in case you might need functionality down the road, like I mentioned earlier. I think things like balancing the tech with the business rules and training are critical, right? Like it would be amazing if you can automate every component, and it would be fantastic if you could really customize the software to your solution and really customize the solution to your business. But how complicated would that be for training, for example? How long is that going to take to implement? How long is the development going to take? If you need changes, what happens? If you ever want to switch out your BMS or your MSP, what are the implications? So really focusing on those sort of must versus nice to haves. The other component I see, and from a complication perspective, is often organizations try to do everything in one go. We are great believers in a phased approach. The big bang can be very difficult. Take a global program, for example. Even if you have a large US or North American program where it's typically one language, one currency, much simpler, it may not be best to roll in light industrial and IT at the same time, or direct sourcing and SOW straight from the start. Sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't. That phased approach is something that we typically would recommend. And I think, again, from the over-engineering perspective, is dialing it back to that user experience. How can I get this activity done in the most simple way and the most time effective way. If you're a manager that goes to post a job and then you don't post a job for 6 months, how complicated is it for me to relearn this system? So again, huge believers in not over engineering.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it comes back to the why. So Kevin makes a good point there, classic scope creep. So as service providers, we push back as much as we can, but ultimately, if the client demands we want this no matter what, then yeah, eventually you're going to do it for them, but don't come back to us and complain and wonder why it's taking so long to roll out a program and why you're not getting adoption. So I think, John makes some really good points.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's just to be as pragmatic as possible. And when a client has a requirement, it's to say, okay, here's the simple, medium, and complicated way to do it. And here's how it affects implementation time and potentially budget.
Yep.
Yeah, so number 9 is don't be all things to everyone. So like I mentioned, the Mandarin example, we see this a lot with global programs. Clients have really fragmented spend globally, but 85% of it is in the US. And you ask any procurement person, the 80-20 rule is really achieving what they need to achieve. Focusing on, okay, what are the biggest pain points? Who are the heaviest users? Can really genuinely get you most of the way there. So I think it's really important to hone in on that. And that also comes from an implementation, change management perspective as well. We roll out the red carpet to really the people who are experiencing the most pain or have the most volume. Again, trying to avoid that over engineering and always coming back to the why. Some of this is obviously quite repetitive, but the nice to haves, you can do a phased approach. There's no reason that you need advanced analytics at the start, for example. Maybe we can plug that in later, or we're working on programs right now where they're going to do an integration with their ATS, but they want to get it up and running, get the managers used to it first before they do that. So having those lists of nice to haves and evolving the program with the technology is really important for many of the programs that we see.
Yeah. And Brian, you said, how do we feel about pilot programs? I think there's also emerging in the market is, what about a trial period, right? Like a 30, 60-day trial where the company can just test out and kind of kick the tires in the system to see, is it going to meet that minimum viable product for us? Can we work with it?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a couple more. We have about 6 more slides, and then we'll go right to the roundtables. I want to make sure we're time check.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, a little bit cheesy here, but you get the gist. So the nicest thing about teamwork is you always have others on your side. So I think, for us, it's really, really important, like Wayne said earlier, not to do these types of projects in a vacuum. Okay, so on the implementation front, I think it goes back to the engineering, it goes back to the shiny objects, it goes back to your business requirements, it goes back to how long you want this to take to implement. So I think too many resources choose VMS technologies because something is shiny or because they perceive everyone else is using it. Like a good example is like we have many clients that we've implemented who are enterprise companies, but they don't have enterprise spend. So they feel like they should have this big global enterprise sort of product, but really they don't get the love that they need. It is over manufactured for the type of spend that they have. So making sure that you choose the right VMS is really critical. And that could be from a cultural perspective, it could be from a speed to implement perspective, it could be geographies, job categories, specific functionality around healthcare, light industrial, high volume, IT, whatever it may be. So I think that's really, really important. Being easy to work with, being responsive if you're working with a modern tech company, right? So ensure that there's a real fit for the product and for the culture. For me, we often see particularly sort of mid-market or lower enterprise level spend. It's hard to get really strong implementation resources. So make sure that the team that are assigned to you and the resources you work with are experienced, have done this before, and can really handle it. And they'll be hands-on when you really need them. And again, going back to the functionality, make sure the product matches the requirement and not some pie in the sky dream for 2, 3, 5, 10 years down the line. Looking at things like the tech stack and the interface. So maybe you need to export reporting for yourselves, and how easy or difficult is that to do? Do you need specific server environments because you're a publicly traded company in the UK, for example, making sure that the supplier can lift and shift an AWS server very, very easily. And then keep the emotion out of it. I think that's a huge one when choosing a product. Okay, so we'll speed this up a little here, but number 11 in terms of success components for implementation is making sure that you clearly define those business requirements. Wayne touched on this earlier, but really engage with all the user groups. What is the pain point for each user group? Not only does that drive change champions down the road, but it makes them feel engaged in the solution.
Every project should have a charter, and the charter should be really clear and honest, and you really should know yourself. Where the $10 million or the $100 million RFP, more often than not, becomes the $5 million implementation. So really be clearly, don't just understand your business requirements, have a good honest look at the viability of your business, deliver the promises that you're making, not just to your stakeholders, but to your supplier partners as well.
Yeah, and it sounds really fundamental and basic, but you should have your business requirements documented, approved, signed off. Everyone should be on the same page, and that should be a living and breathing document. They should have a change log, and as your Bible going forward. Like, I've worked on $250 million programs where they do not have the most basic documentation of the initial process. And the other part is, I feel that we see some brain drain in our industry. We have really talented procurement and HR people come over from different areas. They run a contingent workforce program. They spend 2 years learning it, and then they go back to a promotion in procurement and HR. So really, you need that documentation is critical for your program.
That's a really good point. On average, 30% of our program managers turnover. Yeah.
Okay, so sort of piggybacking on the last point, but really having that strong project governance, making sure that you have all of the stakeholders aligned. You have the steering committee, you have the executive sponsor who can put their weight behind this thing. And make sure that you engage the expertise of your partners, both MSP, VMS, or consultants if you're using them. Making sure that you have that project plan, the timelines are accountable, and that you're holding your suppliers accountable to that process, because all too often it gets off the rails fast. And if you don't have that accountability, then it becomes really difficult to engage in this type of projects. And then change management team loved the first phrase there, not just muffins and balloons. I often think across the board in any type of implementation, outsourcing, technology, whatever it may be, that change management is often really, really neglected. So making sure that you have all of the documentation you need, that you're out there, shaking hands, kissing babies, wherever it may be in the business, making sure you have that what's in it for me for those different user groups, managers, finance, suppliers, and engage those change champions internally at your organization. If they feel part of the solution, they're much more likely to be supportive. And, that water cooler talk is really a thing, right? Your branding and how your program is perceived is really, really important. So educating when you go out to the managers and the users on why you're doing this, what's in it for me. And the other part is like tying the sort of implementation of a VMS to the corporate goals and to the personal goals of the user. Like, why is this going to make my job easier? How does it relate to the corporate goal? And for my goals, as opposed to just as an initiative, coming from corporate, like we often see that in light industrial, where corporate makes a decision, then you get to the warehouse and the manager's like, this is insane. So engage in those user groups and having those roadshows, making sure the marketing, the branding of the program is really visible, and making sure the training, the high touch white glove service, particularly at the start, is really, really best in class.
All right. I got to go wrap up. We'll try and
we got 2 more. We want to encourage people to stick around with the roundtables. We're going to do our best. They're only a long time so we can have that roundtable discussion.
Yeah. So this slide really talks about, setting for me anyway, my first implementation, I did not set a date on when we're going live. Eventually I just wanted everything to be perfect. I just kept working on everything perfect, convinced the client, let's just stick through it. We need to get a few more things in. Technology doesn't quite do everything I want it to do yet. And finally, the client got fed up and said, it's going live in 2 weeks, do it. And I think I learned a hard lesson at that point. You'll get that date, stick to it, and know what your minimum viable product is. And don't get stuck in that paralysis piece. And make sure once you go live, there's support in place. Make sure you have a team, whether it's the VMS provider doing it, whether if you have an MSP, are they the first level help desk? So make sure you have a support group in place as well. And then 15, I led with this. I'm going to close with this in terms of the 15 hacks, but really the community contingent workforce industry is phenomenal. If you're just starting out or you're stuck on something, reach out. We're happy to help. Reach out to us. Brian is one of the gurus of the industry. We've got a bunch of great consultants that are on this webinar as well. So if you need help understanding who they are and who you should reach out to, myself, John, Brian, I'm sure we're all would help you steer you in the right direction. So leverage the industries, the webinars, learn, and don't be afraid. Ask for help. We're all more than willing to help people getting started in the space.
I think that is such a fantastic way to close, Wayne and John. I think that one of the huge sort of benefits is being in this industry is the ability to constantly be curious. And I think if you're curious and you really are genuinely interested in advancing your career in the future of work, curiosity to me is the most powerful positive force in the universe. And this industry allows you to do that 100%, be nothing but curious. So any final comments before we move on to some of our closing slides and the roundtables?
Not for me, no. And then the last quote is really, once you've implemented, it doesn't stop there. So you need to make sure you've got infrastructure in place, good support, and it's always going to morph and it's going to change and adapt. And it's a living piece of technology that you need to be on top of. And that's why I think leveraging a VMS partner is critical, because that's their business. That's what they do every day of their life.
Fantastic. I think this was super great stuff. Watch out. Oh, John, I'm sorry. Do you have any final thoughts before we carry on? I apologize.
No, I'm good. Sorry. Go ahead.
Fantastic. Everyone's going to get a free copy of both the presentation and the PowerPoint as presented, as well as the buyer's guide will be available to everyone who completes the survey. You'll be given a copy of the survey once you finish, that we present with a link. If that link does not show up or some reason you have a challenge with it, just please let us know. I'll make sure you get it. You want to engage more, that you can obviously reach out to the professionals on the phone and LinkedIn, and also just stick around for the roundtable. Find out more, Connex's VMS software,